Everybody grab a seat and we'll get started. Can you hear me in the back? Good. Good morning. I'm Jimmy Granberry, about 30 days into my chairmanship of ULI of Nashville, and just a few housekeeping announcements, and then we'll get to the program because I know that's why everybody's here. Our membership, boy, we got some really good goals. Our team, Laura Reinbold, is heading up our membership, and we got some really good goals for the next 2 years under my chairmanship, and we're gonna hit them. Right, Laura? Just this week, we got 3 or 4 new unsolicited members, so it's great. Just keep talking up ULI, and let's keep the membership growing. The new mentor program, I think Rose has got a couple of extra spots left. Is that right, Rose?
Well, I shouldn't say this. We have plenty of spots, but we always want more. So.
Okay. So it's a great program, and if you want to sign up to be a mentor, just contact Rose and really make a difference in our young ULI members and get that going. Our sponsorships, the boards, I think all our stuff's on the TV. Thank you again to all our sponsors, and Steve Kalinsky is once again heading that up. Is Steve here today? Hey, Steve. So Steve and yep. So we've got some really good goals as well, and we're going to be in touch. So when you see Gresham Smith and Partners come through on your caller ID, do not answer the phone, please. 3 new unsolicited firms: J.E. Dunn, Foresight Incorporated, Patterson Real Estate Advisors out of Atlanta. So that's great. Handouts, programming. Another handout on your chair for the fiscal year 15 programming. Also on our calendar, take note, these programs always sell out, and they're really a lot of fun, and it's a really good open forum. We don't allow the press in, so our speakers are very candid and are open to questions, so it's always a great learning experience for all. Our next program is Building for Wellness on September the 18th. The Building Healthy Places Action Council has had one meeting, and if you'd like to join, contact Rose or Ryan Doyle today. We're putting that program together. Infrastructure, today's program. You can't open the paper and you just read about something. Just this past week, we had a 30-inch water main break. The AMP is constantly in the paper. We're not here today to talk positive or negative about the AMP, but it's just a very heated conversation. You read about other cities and what they're doing as far as mass transit, so it's a very pointed conversation, and it's part of our program today. Today's program is in part based on the 8th annual report from ULI, the ULI and Ernst & Young infrastructure, and our speaker will talk about that today. And ULI CEO Patrick Phillips said, the survey findings also reinforce the need for close coordination between land use planning and infrastructure planning. This survey indicates a growing awareness among the public and private sector of the importance of investments in a variety of transportation systems, including active transportation that offers an alternative to constant car use. We have entered a new era that requires new approaches to funding and building infrastructure to support the creation of communities that are healthier, more livable, economically prosperous, and environmentally sustainable. Ernst & Young's Global Infrastructure Coordination construction leaders said that real estate and civic leaders must work together to find more creative and collaborative ways to articulate benefits and overcome funding challenges on infrastructure developments, as this is critical to stimulating long-term economic development. And our keynote speaker knows all about these needs and solutions firsthand. We're very fortunate to have Gabe Klein here with us today. I think some of y'all that heard him speak yesterday, some of us went to dinner last night. I don't need to go into a lot of depth on his bio. It's on your table. But one thing was real fun. I just got back from training camp, I call it. I was in Colorado for ULI. They called it boot camp. I called it training camp, whatever you want to call it. Felt like I was a Titan for a couple of days. But anyway, one of the things they did really fun, you know, everybody knows everybody and you know, what they do and, you know, how they're married, kids, all that kind of stuff. But they made us go around the room and everybody had to say one really interesting fact about themselves that nobody knew. And that's how you now remember people. Oh, you're the guy that's the water skier. You're the guy that did this. So I'm not going to read Gabe's bio, but when he starts his speech, I'm going to ask him to tell us all one very interesting thing about him that we would never know. And you doesn't have to share too much, but if you, whatever, you know. I will tell you that we were swapping pictures last night, and I was showing him a picture of my new grandson, and he was showing me a new picture of his new daughter. And so it was a lot of fun sharing it. It shows you how much younger he is than me. But anyway.
I just started late.
That's right. That's Gabe Klein. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Good to have you.
Well, first of all, it's great to be in Nashville. Can you guys hear me okay? The mic's a little, okay. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about myself so you guys have a sense of where I'm coming from in my comments. So I spent 2/3 to 3/4, excuse me, of my career in the private sector, mostly in startups, companies like Zipcar, which went public, so varying, you know, sizes of companies, usually in the alternative transportation space. And what I learned is that what we call alternative transportation in cities is changing and becoming more of the mainstream transportation system. And when we were getting Zipcar off the ground in the early 2000s, that's when you really saw an influx of people back to cities. And younger generations started with Generation X, and now Generation Y, or the millennials, as we call them. And actually, a lot of the data is showing also empty nesters that are coming back to cities all want a lot of the same things. And they want a livable, walkable, sort of live, work, play environment type city. And so the introduction of things like Zipcar, more mass transit, more sidewalks is crucial to creating that place that people want. And people are moving back to cities because they want all of it. It's not just about the sidewalk or the bus. It's also about the bars and the restaurants and the community center and the parks. So you have to really fire on all cylinders to get the recipe right. So in my private sector experience, I was very frustrated typically with government, to be honest, with the sort of glacial pace of change. When we were launching Zipcar and we were considered a rental car agency by the government, which almost put us out of business in a number of cities, because when you're charging $8 an hour, a $12 convention center tax makes it untenable. The same sort of stuff that Uber and Lyft and other companies and Airbnb are going through now. So I try to take a very practical, pragmatic approach to this, and I'm very much a capitalist. And I did go to work for the government under Adrian Fenty in Washington, D.C. to run the transportation department. And he was making dramatic change, particularly in schools. And he lost his election, which he was fine with. You know, he said, I'd rather make 12 years of change in 4 years than be sitting in government for 12 years doing nothing. And we made dramatic change in transportation and public space. He redid almost every park in the city, rehabbed schools, put in charter schools, so on and so forth. So when I got out of there, I went to work. I was going back to the private sector, and Mayor Rahm Emanuel had just won the election and asked me to come to Chicago. And I took it as a personal challenge because people were like, oh, this is a fluke. This private sector guy comes in and does all this stuff in a couple years really quickly. He couldn't do it again. So my ego got the best of me. And I went to Chicago, and we did about twice as much as we did in D.C. because I actually understood the levers of government and finance and how to get things done. So anyway, I'm not telling you all that to talk about myself, but it's more so you understand sort of my viewpoint, and in my comments, why in some cases I'm being brutally honest because I don't think we have a lot of time to waste. In Nashville, there's so much amazing stuff going on here. My sister went to Vanderbilt. I was here last year actually and toured around the city and took the bus and used the bike share program and all those things. And the development is staggering. I mean, even more so this year than when I was here last year. There's cranes everywhere. And so that's a wonderful thing. And you got people moving here. And it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, literally. You know, every 50 to 100 years, you rebuild your city. You know, in Chicago, there was a big fire. You know, as Mayor Emanuel likes to say, you know, we are literally building a new Chicago because everything's 100 years old. And so we have wooden water mains that we're replacing that are 110 years old, streets that are collapsing. And it's really easy not to make those investments. It's just easy. People take it for granted. They say, oh, well, the road's been there. I mean, you know, they don't understand it's $1 million a mile to fix the road, to repave the road. So there's some education that has to happen. There's some leadership from government that needs to happen, some tough choices that need to be made. And the infrastructure survey that ULI did, you know, it's funny, I look at it and I'm not really too surprised by it, but even ULI was surprised by a lot of the results. And I just want to mention this infrastructure report. So I'm going to talk about that first. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about urban design guidelines, which ULI has just endorsed. And then I was going to talk a bit about the future. If you want to hear more about sort of what I've done in the past, we're going to be doing a different talk at lunch that'll cover a little bit more of that. But Ernst & Young has been, you know, really helpful in getting this done for the last 8 years. And each year there's a little bit different focus. This year, well, first of all, these are the key research questions that we're asked. And there's a real focus on public sector folks and then private sector developers that are actually in the ULI membership and, you know, smaller firms, not mega firms. And there was a desire to figure out what's important to public sector versus what's important to private sector. Where do they align? Where do they differ? So here's the methodology. So ULI conducted a survey, followed up with interviews, I think about 35 interviews with selected respondents. And also, they also looked at where the US and global responses were different. Because as we know, the amount of investment, particularly in infrastructure, is very different here than it is in Asia or Europe. In the US, we spend 1% to 2% of our GDP on infrastructure, roads, bridges, water pipes, and so on. In Europe, it's 3, 4, 5%, and then in Asia, it's 6 to 9%. That's a big difference. Again, we've sort of gotten a little bit lazy. We take it for granted until, you know, a bridge collapses or we realize we're not competitive, right? The problem with that is by the time you realize you're not competitive with Durham or Austin, you know, it's 5, 10 years to get these mega projects done. One of the things I'll be talking about a bit at lunch, by the way, is how to get things done really fast. And you can do it. But this is why you have to have people with vision and forethought, or by the time you're looking in the rearview mirror, it's really too late, and you've lost your edge. But anyway, the key findings are that good infrastructure is a key driver of where people are going to build. If you look at, you know, the old Pearl District example from Portland, you know, where they got $3.5 billion worth of investment around a very short streetcar line, you know, that speaks volumes. But also there's BRT projects like the Cleveland Health Line. It's gotten about $5 billion worth of investment. So people ask me all the time, well, how much is too much for this project? You know, like we just built the Silver Line in DC, from DC to Dulles. How many people have been to Dulles Airport? Okay, a lot of you. It's a real pain in the ass to get into the city. You got to take the shuttle or something. It's like $60 in 55 minutes. So there was a desire to connect DC to Dulles, but more than that, the neighborhoods in between, like how many of you have been to Tyson's Corner? Okay, a lot of shopping, like one of the least walkable places in the United States. So they've realized they've made some huge mistakes. So to put in that Silver Line, $12 billion was the initial cost estimate. By the time we got done, $18 billion. So the question is that too much? I don't think so. If it was $24 billion, I'd probably still do it. All that matters is the return on investment. And the bottom line is Tyson's and Fairfax would be dead soon. Literally dead, dying on the vine, abandoned buildings, you know, tumbleweeds in lots of places if they didn't put that in. So when you look at the value, whether it's, you know, the AMP or the bike share station or parking garage, what's the return on investment? They were surprised at ULI how much public and private thought that improving public transit, ped, and bike infrastructure was really, really crucial. And the importance of cooperation between the public and private sector. And this isn't just about developments, although it's hugely important. It's everything. We need to partner a lot more. And one of the things I've learned about Nashville is you guys have been doing that for a long time, which is something you have on New York and Chicago and a lot of other people. And part of it's that you're probably friendlier to business down here. So there's a different relationship, and that's something you can really capitalize on. And this is the elephant in the room, sort of, the public's willingness to pay for infrastructure is a top factor that will shape cities. Because people don't understand. They just don't. They don't understand the value of the infrastructure. They've never had to build it. And we built the highway system in 1956, and a lot of people either weren't alive or they were too young to remember it being built. And unfortunately, human beings are really can only relate to the things that they can see or touch or have seen in their lifetime. Actually, the EPA did a study. Whatever you think about global warming, I'm taking the politics out of it, but let's just say it's happening. They did some studies and realized that people just can't relate to it. They can't relate to things unless they're bearing down on them. And so it's really important, I think, to understand psychology when you're looking at how you're going to rebuild your city. Because you have to appeal to people. You got to put out a real vision. When I got to DC and we were working on the streetcar, trying to save the streetcar, which had gotten really controversial. Nobody really understood why we were doing it. People felt like we were experimenting on them. We put together a 37-mile vision plan for the city. And a lot of it was based on the streetcar system that we used to have. And then we took the streetcars, we flew them over. Well, we didn't fly them over. That would be crazy. We put them on a boat from the Czech Republic, because we thought the Czech Republic was going to, it was like a tinderbox, and we thought that we might lose them. But we brought them over. We stuck them right downtown on a lot. We did tours. We got people really excited about the vision for the streetcar. And that's what saved the project. And now it's got hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding, and the first line finally is being turned on, and we have a design, build, operate, maintain contract on the street to do 22 miles, the first tranche. But without that vision, people aren't going to get excited. So anyway, these next few slides are really the actual results. And I can go through them in some detail, but a lot of this is in the report, which you can get on the ULI website. But what's interesting here is that both public and private said that the drivers of real estate investments are the quality of the infrastructure, with a little bit higher on the private side on consumer demand. But both were pretty much in agreement. In terms of the percentage saying it was a top consideration or very important, what's interesting is bike and ped infrastructure are down at the bottom, although private said ped infrastructure is very important. Interesting the government didn't see that as much. Passenger connections to other cities also ranked high. And of course, well-maintained roads and bridges people agreed upon. But public transit services fell sort of right in the middle. But what's interesting is when you go to what are the priorities, then improved public transit services go right to the top, meaning people think that the service out there now is pretty poor. And so in terms of what needs an upgrade, public transit. And we'll talk a little bit later about sort of how that happened. Perceptions of quality, healthcare facilities, very good. Water, wastewater, telecom, energy, but again, go way down. Sidewalks and ped infrastructure, public transit, and bike infrastructure is woefully lacking. It's bad. And it's bad in a lot of cities. And keep in mind that the old cities like DC, Chicago, New York, where I've worked, those cities were designed in a time before the automobile. Whereas cities like Austin and Nashville, Fort Lauderdale, I was just down there, they were designed around the automobile. So in some ways the challenge is bigger, but also you have a lot of opportunities because you've got a lot more right-of-way to play with. So you got a lot more space to take back for people and to take away from cars. And part of my message to you, again, from a business and practical standpoint, as well as a safety standpoint and everything else, is if you just de facto give over the city to cars, you will strangle the economic vitality of the city. And that's one of the reasons people left in the first place. back in the 60s. So what are some other models? Well, the Hong Kong model is really interesting. Talk about public and private. They basically have created a corporation, the Mass Transit Railway Corp. So they're a developer. They buy all the land up, put in the public transit, pay for it by capitalizing on the TOD and land use. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Now, we might not be able to do that in this country in a lot of places, but we could do something like it with a partnership between public and private. And value capture is really, really important. When you put in a transit stop like we did in Columbia Heights for the Metro, we got billions and billions of dollars invested, high density all around it. Now, we made one mistake. Target talked the city into putting in 2,000 parking spaces. And this is an interesting story because we had this beautiful TOD, all this density, and at the last minute, Target says, we're not going to come in unless you build another whole level of parking. So we did. It's gone empty. No one uses it. It's very expensive, and the city had to pay for it. And when it does get used, nobody can get around because we use bump outs. We slimmed it down to one lane because it was supposed to be a walkable village, right? Well, it is, but then we're sending people mixed messages. Like, here's the Metro stop. Here's the new circulator bus service. There's the bike share station, but also here's 2,000 parking spaces. And so we send subliminal messages to people about what they should be doing. And my argument is that most people want to be told what they should do, so we got to be careful what we tell them. And in Hong Kong, they're very clear about what the priorities are. And for any of you that have been there, they have amazing public transportation, including over to mainland China. So back to the survey, what are the trends and issues that are shaping cities? Again, number one, public's willingness or ability to pay for infrastructure, huge issue. And I would argue that we need a public education campaign to let people know what infrastructure really costs and how it's been built and the history of infrastructure and why it's crumbling. People in Chicago complain about the potholes, but they don't want to raise the gas tax, right? And the gas tax has been at 18.6 cents at the federal level since 1992. Now, if they had just pegged it to the consumer price index, which would have been the logical thing to do, if they'd just done that, we'd be in a whole different situation, but they didn't. And so now we got to argue about raising taxes, and people don't understand the difference between spending and investing. And when I say people, I mean, I know all of you do, because you're in the business. But there are a lot of people that don't understand, and they think, buying a nuclear weapon, right, that we're going to end up burying in the ground and trying to get rid of in 20 years is the same as investing in a road. They're two totally different things. It's just two totally different things. And we have no problem giving billions of dollars to Germany, which is, by the way, one of the healthiest economies in the world, so they can come back and buy our weapons. So we have to look at what are we subsidizing. We subsidize road building. We subsidize defense. But we won't subsidize all the rest of our infrastructure, including mass transit. And the gas tax is it's covering less than half of our road building. So that means the general fund has to pay for our road building. So what's the problem with that? Well, that means we're borrowing from China to build our roads. And we're building a deficit to build our infrastructure. And the longer you wait to build your infrastructure, the more it costs. And anybody who's in the business knows if you rebuild the road on schedule, you can get away with rebuilding a lot less of it. You rebuild it at 50 years instead of 25 or 30, you have to go all the way down and replace everything. So we end up spending more money. Again, it's not about politics, it's just pragmatism. So what would get more people on board to actually fund the infrastructure? And when I say more people, I mean everybody. We need a stronger investment case for investment. We need messages that resonate with the public about how we're going to make their lives easier, how we're going to save them money in the long run and in the short run. We need cost-effective investment strategies. So the government's got to be a lot better at building on a budget. When we rebuilt the 11th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., people were amazed. $450 million for a bridge. It's actually two bridges. So we did a design build on it, and we saved about $85 million. And we brought it in a year early by partnering with the private sector to make that happen, by allowing them more flexibility to design it as we built it. Caused us a lot of consternation and stress, but it was worth it. So the government's willing to take a little more risk. The private sector will definitely come along. And that results in careful stewardship of resources. This just came out the other day. 6 in 10 Americans see the economic benefits of good highways, railroads, airports, and they think that it outweighs the cost to taxpayers. But they don't want to pay for it. A majority, 58%, oppose raising federal gasoline taxes to fund improvements to roads. Majorities of both Democrats and Republicans oppose raising the gas tax. And this is something else that we have to talk about if we're going to have an honest conversation about infrastructure. There is nothing happening at the federal level. I saw in 60 Minutes the other night, Herbert Hoover said he had a do-nothing Congress. They got nothing done. Back in, was that the 40s? They passed 900 bills. We've passed 153 this year. And he had a do-nothing Congress. I mean, they're doing nothing. And the state often is not doing enough. So it really comes to places like Nashville and DC not the federal government in DC, the local government, to get things done. Because the mayors are directly responsible to their constituents. They're closer to their constituents than anybody else. And so people are foregoing the federal money and spending local money because the investment that they get so far outweighs what they're spending on the infrastructure. They have to do it. They can't wait for the federal government. They can't wait for the FTA to take 7 years to approve their transit projects. In DC, we're building a streetcar out of our own pocket. So, funding sources for new infrastructure. So all 3 of the top funding sources involve contributions from real estate. And when you look at bus rapid transit or streetcar, for instance, or subway, there's huge value capture opportunities. And I can tell you that developers more and more are willing to contribute. I was in Florida recently, and this guy came up to me and said, you know what? I went to the government and I said, I'd like to, instead of building more parking, because I don't need all this accessory parking, I'd like to put $2 million into public transit. And the government said no. Well, that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. And we'll talk about parking in just a minute. Now, there is a valid concern, and that's the long-term operations and maintenance, particularly in this country, less so overseas. But that makes sense, because look at the situation that we're in now. People want to build stuff, they want to go to the ribbon cutting, but then they don't want to make the hard choices to dedicate revenues towards operations and maintenance, and things fall apart. So that's a valid concern that we need to address. So anyway, there's the recap. I don't think I need to go through it again, but I would encourage people to look at the report. There's a physical version you can get, and I think there are some copies here, and it's online, but it's really solid. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about sort of what's happening across the country, what's happening around the world in terms of new mobility. This is actually a picture I've doctored. This is a new transit station that we built in the West Loop. As soon as we put it in, Google took 300,000 square feet, 2 blocks north. A new hotel was announced, and it was named one of the hottest neighborhoods in the country by Details magazine. I don't know if anybody reads that anymore, but so look, premium transit's really important, and there are a lot of ways to do it. You can do subway. You can do what Chicago does, which is a combination of subway, elevated rail. You can do bus, although bus in most places is not premium. But if you combine bus and rail, you can get bus rapid transit. So in DC, I focused on the streetcar, and we had different needs there. We had been just ravaged by the riots, even close to downtown. We needed to stimulate reinvestment. As soon as we announced the streetcar in DC and the streetscape project, every parcel of real estate was bought up around H Street, every single one. And again, it's one of the hottest neighborhoods in the country now. And the streetcar hasn't even started running, although it's being tested right now. The thing about bus rapid transit is you can't really do it halfway. I mean, there is bus rapid transit light, and we have that in Chicago too. And it's basically an express bus, and that's important to have, and it's an important part of the mix. And one of the messages that I want to be clear about today is there is no silver bullet to your transportation woes. I mean, you could argue in DC that the Metro was the silver bullet, but really the Metro is a hub and spoke system. You need a lot of other services. So we have the Metro bus, the regional Metro bus. We've got the circulator bus in the city. We've got 300 bike share systems, stations on a regional basis. We rely heavily on the private sector services. Uber, Lyft, Zipcar has on-street spaces. Car2Go has on-street spaces. It's like a, I'm going to get this wrong, like a bouillabaisse, right? It's like a goulash. And one thing is not going to do it. The AMP is not going to do it. The AMP is a down payment on what you need. It's just the beginning. It's not the solution. Same with Ashland BRT in Chicago. So we have 2 BRT projects. This one, if you've been to Chicago, you know we have the same sort of thing. We have a hub and spoke train system. Then we have buses that rove all over the place. We've got commuter rail, all goes down to Union Station, but there's nothing north-south connecting all of those different modes. This would do it. Very controversial. Anything hard is going to be controversial. But we got through it, and we're going to build it. And it's going to be center running. What's important about that is it's a lot easier for the buses to flow with traffic. You do have to get rid of some left turns, always controversial, right? You have to get rid of a lane of traffic or parking. But I'm going to explain to you later why that's not really such a big issue with the technology that's coming. The important thing with bus rapid transit is that you can get it up to a reasonable speed between getting rid of stops, keeping it moving with traffic, giving it its own dedicated right-of-way, that it can function like rail. How many of you guys have been to Nantes, France? I just went there for the first time. Okay, there's a lady in the back. I really need to start putting pictures in here. They have, they have an amazing BRT system that goes right through the core of the city from the visitor center. So all the visitors come in and park at the edge of the city, park their cars in the like kiss and ride lot, and get on the BRT. So you don't have many cars downtown. And they just recently closed the whole core and made it ped only. And you see that all over Europe now. A lot of downtowns. Actually, in Deventer, in the Netherlands, I was there recently, you can't ride your bike downtown. Only walking. Now, you can deliver stuff until like 6 in the morning in these little mini trucks, but then you got to get the hell out. And no cycling because they want kids and grandmothers and everybody to be able to walk without the danger of getting hit by a cyclist. Then you get out a little bit further, you can walk and bike, and then you get out, and literally when you're on the edge of the downtown, you're looking at beautiful farmland. And there's cars going by, and then everybody rides their bikes into the major city. It's just a whole different way of looking at things. And it's hard for us to imagine because we built what we have. But it can be different. And bus rapid transit is one of the ways you can get there at a lot lower cost than rail. And if you look at the Nantes system or the Bordeaux system, I mean, there's all these systems. They look like a train. It looks and feels like a train on rubber. So the key is speed it up, make it work for people so it can get them there on time. More reliable, so have it come every 10 minutes, for instance, so people know that it's always coming, and save people time and money. Again, it's a challenge, but we have an opportunity to create a complete street. A street with a very thin sidewalk and a tiny little bike lane and 4 car lanes is not a complete street. It's not. And what we learned when we got into the downtown, this is sort of important, but not, this is, I mean, it's important to the project. People need to understand that the technology at the signal makes it go. So you get like a green wave for the bus. So the bus gets priority. But anyway, when we got downtown and we looked at what we had, you see this everywhere, 4 or 5 lane auto-dominated streets. And we looked at the data, and the data is always important to look at, always. Because you can have all your thoughts and intuitions, and I think my intuitions are pretty good, but the data will tell you if you're actually right. And you mix your data with the intuition, you might have something. So we thought, well, there's not that many buses going through the loop compared to cars, and this is what the mayor's office was telling us. But we know there's a lot of people on those buses. So we started doing counts, and only 4% of the traffic going through the loop was buses. Not that many. So the argument from some people was, why would you give priority to 4% of the traffic? That doesn't make any sense. Then you're going to take the space away from the cars. Well, 47% of the people going through the loop were on the bus. So 4% of the traffic was buses, but those hold like 65 people. So 47% of the people are on the bus. Yet we're giving no priority to the bus. So the bus was going 2 to 3 miles per hour. And I would laugh. I used to walk home because I could walk down the street and pass the bus. But people would still ride the bus because they didn't want to walk. But anyway, so this is the before, and this is the after. Now, I don't have a bunch of bike project slides, but the bike projects are another good example like this of how you can take lanes away from cars and actually speed up traffic. But when I say speed up traffic, I don't mean literally speed it up to go faster, because that's not what you want to do. You want better throughput. And people think in an urban area that you want traffic to go faster, and the faster you go, the faster you're going to get to your destination. Total BS. There's no correlation. All that matters is in how organized a fashion traffic moves, and what time do you leave and what time do you get to your destination. And the biggest problems we have in cities are double parking and construction that lead to traffic backups. It's not what you think. That's like 50, 60% of traffic backups. So in this design, yes, we're putting in a protected bike facility. Yes, we're taking a lane, putting a platform in the street, dedicated bus lane, which will be enforced with automated cameras, and only 2 car lanes. But if you look at the end, this is important, right up at the top, there's a turn lane built in. And a lot of like road diets, you'll see we go from 4 lanes in cities to 2 lanes, but then put in a turn lane. And the operations can improve for vehicles, because those 2 lanes in the middle were blocked 75% of the time anyway with people with their turn signals on. And they were dangerous, and people couldn't cross the street. So there's ways to re-engineer our streets so that cars move in a more organized fashion, better throughput. You give dedicated space to the bus and to people walking and biking. So this idea that it's an either or and you're always taking something from one person to give to another, it's not true. It's false. I mean, there are some times when you're going to have to take capacity away. It's true. But the other thing you have to realize is if you're looking at your counts, and the engineers will often do this, and that's why I would have to, take the engineers and shake them a little bit and say, look, the traffic engineers, you're assuming nobody's going to get out of their car. And if you're assuming nobody's going to get out of their car and onto the bus, then let's not even do this project. There's no point. DC is another great example where the city's exploding in growth. Over the last decade, we started to grow. So we had a 3% growth rate, 2000 to 2010, 6% drop in car registrations. Counterintuitive, right? But not really when you look at all the trends. I'll skip that. So the other misnomer about these projects is that they're just about moving people. And speed is important and throughput and all these things, but the developers built the streetcar system the first time with the electric companies often. They were partners. And I can tell you, like in Washington, they would build the streetcar, they would fund it all the way out to a new neighborhood, which was a suburb, and then they build all the houses around it. And that's how Washington was built. There were all these streetcar neighborhoods. And so by bringing them back, we're really doing the same thing. We have these cities that have been ravaged by riots and blight and disinvestment, and I could go on and on. And all we're doing is the same thing. And in the bigger presentation that I give later, and a little bit of it yesterday, I talk about how we're not recreating the wheel. We're doing all the things we did around 1900. That's all we're doing. And then my argument is that this car-dominated, auto-centric society that we've built is really just a temporary screw-up. And by the way, I love cars. I'm a car aficionado, so don't leave here and get in your car and feel guilty. And we have created a place where you need to have a car. But my argument is we've been on the earth for tens of thousands of years. Just because we made some planning mistakes in the 50s and 60s doesn't mean that we should continue to live those mistakes forever and re-strangle our cities. So again, looking at the streetcar, and look, there's people in DC that hate the streetcar. They don't get it. They think it's ridiculous. You know, da-da-da. So you're going to have that everywhere. But the developers love it, and they're the biggest supporters of the streetcar. And the Business Improvement District loves it, and the Chamber loves it, because they know it's pro-business. And they know that the investment we're going to get is much bigger than what we're going to spend. So we'll spend $150 million on this line. So what? That's nothing. That's peanuts. These numbers sound big to people. They're not. We spent $3 trillion in Iraq. And what did that get us? Sorry, I couldn't help it. I am from Washington. So this slide, I just stuck in last night. I was doing some searching and a little research. You guys had a great streetcar system, and the Nashville Railway and Light Company built it. That's why a lot of cities have streetlights, because they made the economics work by building the streetcar, and the economics work for building housing. So transportation has always had a direct connection to land use and services. And I would argue, and I don't know what any of those streets are, but I would argue that if you went back and looked at this, you could spend a year or two like we did on the land use study and the streetcar vision. And your streetcar or your BRT vision plan will just be a subset of this, probably, with some minor changes. So you can save yourself a couple years and a few million.
Too late.
So one of the things we did in Chicago that was really important, and government people don't like to stick their neck out. You know, nobody likes to be criticized in the paper. When you're in the government, there's nothing worse than looking at the comments section in the newspaper under one of these articles. Maybe it's about the ant, maybe it's sidewalks, whatever it is. And you know, you would think that you were like a terrorist, basically, right? But we went out and publicly stated, as part of our Complete Streets policy and plan, that pedestrians were our first priority. Because a city that has a pedestrian first priority is a safe city, an economically healthy city, a healthy city. We have a huge obesity problem that we didn't have. Google pictures of people from the 30s and 40s. Nobody was overweight. Now, there are other factors. They didn't have all the crazy foods we have. They didn't go to Popeyes either. But people worked, they toiled, they weren't fat. So anyway, pedestrians are also transit users and cyclists and auto users. And I often tell a story about how when I was transportation director in DuPont, a woman drove, or in DC, a woman drove into DuPont, parked her car, got out of her car, and was hit by a truck and killed, which was very tragic. There's another lady who was running on New York Avenue, ran off the sidewalk with her earphones in between the wheels of a dump truck and was killed. Now, that woman thought she was a runner. The other lady thought she was a driver. The bottom line is we're pedestrians. We're all pedestrians at various points of the day. So we put together a series of plans. Some of them were longer term. Our pedestrian plan, our Streets for Cycling plan, which called for a safe cycling facility within a half mile of every Chicagoan. Our sustainable urban infrastructure guidelines, we had to get all the other departments who didn't believe in it on board, and then get the mayor to sign off on it. And if they wanted to deviate from it, they had to basically have a waiver. And when we said complete streets, you can't just say it. You got to actually do it. Every city and state says it. There's over 500 policies. The state of Illinois says it, and they were fighting me on actually doing it in Chicago. So it can't be in name only. The other thing that we did is we put together these action agendas in DC and Chicago that are 2-year plans. And since I've only been in my jobs like an average of 2 years and 3 months, people are starting to make the connection. But no, but there's a political reality. You know, your mayor might only be there for the next 2 years or 4 years or 8, but you have to be practical. And for the people in the agency and the public, they want to see tangible milestones that you're going to hit. So we really focused on those milestones. And then we put out an update. This is actually the update. You can get all this online. That showed areas that we'd failed. And we did a lot of pilot projects. And we tried things which changed the expectation of the public. Because then the public's in on it with you. And they're experimenting with you. and they aren't going to hold you to the same standard of quote-unquote failure. I mean, basically, if nobody tries anything risky, you will never do anything great. And around the turn of the last century, not 2000, but 1900, they were trying all kinds of stuff. They were building miles of railroad a day from New York to Chicago. So we have to be willing to take risks and willing to fail. So one of the things I'm proudest of during my tenure at ULI, which is actually coming to a close, it was a 6-month fellowship. It got extended a bit. But I'm also on the board of NACTO, which is the North American City Transportation Officials. Some of you may know AASHTO, which is the state version. And our argument for a long time is that you don't want to stick a round peg in a square hole all the time, and you need different standards for urban areas. And Patrick Phillips and ULI stood up and endorsed the urban street design guidelines from NACTO. And NACTO is basically all the major cities in the US. And I think, is Nashville an affiliate city? I'm not sure if it is, but NACTO should become an affiliate city if you're not. That way I can represent you too. But the key principles are the streets are public spaces. They're not just for one mode or another. They're public spaces. Great streets are great for businesses. Streets can be changed, and they should be modular, and you should be able to change them and reconfigure them. And they're ecosystems, and that we can do a lot quickly if we put our minds to it. So we focus on streets and intersections, design elements, controls and signals. And this advances ULI's mission. I think you mentioned the building healthy places, which ULI is very serious about. You know, when you go to Amsterdam, and I was just over there recently, I couldn't find a gym in the entire city. I could not find, I'm sure they exist somewhere, but I couldn't find it. Yet everybody is super thin, almost gaunt compared to us. Like I was visibly overweight compared to the other. They had over 400 million bike trips last year in Amsterdam, 8 fatalities. They've re-engineered their streets completely. And it's just bustling. Is it congested? Yes, very congested. Lots of people buying stuff. In my presentation yesterday, I showed a picture of Detroit, Woodward Avenue in 1950s, totally congested. As my friend John Norquist likes to say, who is the mayor of Milwaukee and the head of CNU, it's not congested there anymore. Is that a good thing? I don't know. Why do we hate congestion so much? It's about the type of congestion. Also, I would encourage people to look at the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, which is an excellent manual. And so this manual that ULI signed off on builds on the other manuals that they've put out. And there are simple things you can do. You guys have great crosswalks here, but there are a lot of places that don't. Just adding continental crosswalks can make a huge difference. You also see they added bump outs in this picture. Same thing that a road diet can do. Make it a smaller distance for peds to cross the street. This is, I think, 9th Ave in New York. This was a cheap project. So this is one of those commuter routes out of the city. And we've been incentivizing people to fly in and out of the cities for a long time. It's not hard to move parking over one lane. Put in a bike lane, put in a ped safety refuge, a continental crosswalk, and a bus lane. It's not hard. It's really not. It takes some will, but technically it's not that hard, and the construction costs are very low. It's basically paint and a little bit of concrete. So let's talk real quick. How am I doing on time? Does anybody know?
5 minutes.
5? Okay. So let's talk about the transportation department in cities. Or in some cities, it's the public works department with some transportation people in it. So as cities, our goals have changed dramatically. We used to just focus on safety and throughput. But now, we're looking at economic development, supporting public health, active living campaigns, creating more access and mobility for low-income people to get to their jobs, all those equity issues. Our design standards, though, the DNA of our streets remains rooted in a 1950s era approach to highway building. In fact, even federal highways at the federal level, it's called federal highways. And I used to joke with the secretary, with Ray LaHood, that he needs to at least change it to the Federal Roads Department or Department of Sidewalks or something. But even those things send a clear message to people. So we're redesigning basically around people versus modes. Here's Union Square in New York. This looks like a place that you want to work, right? It's a place people work. Well, look what you can do for a few $1,000s, literally a few $1,000s. Planters, paint, aggregate. You can make it a place that people now want to live, work, and play, and it's safe. People are going to raise their kids in a place where they can't cross the street. It's just not going to happen. So if you want people to live in the city, you got to make it feel like a place that people want to live. Here's another view. Here's the Castro in San Francisco, which is a crazy place. There used to be naked people walking around. But transportation departments are increasingly focusing on finding opportunities to create and foster public life, including the quirks. You know, where the old streetcar comes into a dead end, maybe that's a great place to have a little park or public space. Times Square, there's what it used to look like a long time ago. Now, and then to the right, what my counterpart in New York did just a few years ago as an experiment, as a pilot. It's a big pilot. Put down paint, some chairs in Times Square, the biggest intersection in the United States. And guess what? It's busy, busy, busy. Retail is way up. There's more people going to Times Square than ever before. And it's not just a traffic jam with a lot of pollution. This is a place in Chicago where we're taking a street that doesn't need to be there and making it into a larger park around a dense development to provide people that don't have a lot of outdoor space in the development park space. And that's what we used to do. Our garden cities were really designed around tenements and the fact that nobody had public space, nobody had big balconies and roof decks, and so they shared the park space. This is a more road-oriented street, gateway into Chicago, that we couldn't make as pedestrian and bike-friendly as we wanted, but we at least added art to it. A lot of cities have 1% for art, 2% for art. It's important to add art to your road projects. This particular project, the light system, has 16 million different color combinations and can be controlled with an iPad. And more people are integrating public space together, breaking down the barriers between the building and the sidewalk and the street, particularly on slower moving streets, which have really different needs than a major arterial street. This is a business in DC that's just blown up. They will not rent a space unless they can open it up to the outdoors. Their whole thing is, I mean, it's great Italian sandwiches, but you got to be able to flow in and out of the space. Indianapolis, the Cultural Trail. It's really a great prototype for the 21st century street. It's a network of bikeways, pedestrian paths, stormwater features, but it's reinvented Indianapolis and connected the city's cultural districts. Pretty simple stuff, but now they have transit-oriented development around the trail. Or in Minneapolis, I would call it bike-oriented development around the greenways. So what have we learned? We've learned that safety is really good for business. On that project I showed you earlier, 8th Ave and 9th Ave, huge decrease in injuries, decrease in fatalities, and 49% increase in retail. And you can do that with parklets, or you can do that with bike lanes. So I'm not going to have time to delve too deeply into this, but things are changing in terms of the size of housing in cities. Micro units are going in, they're modular. This is a real project in New York. They build them and they literally drop them in. Flexible space, movable walls, so you can make your bedroom bigger. I'm actually designing an extension on my house that's going to have a flexible wall. And this recognition amongst the private sector and the public sector that whether it's younger people or empty nesters moving back to cities, the reason they're moving back is they don't want to own a lot of stuff. They want a simpler life. They don't want the yard. I hate my yard, by the way. They just want to live in a place and have it sort of taken care of. Less friction. They don't want to pay car insurance and house insurance, and they just want it all taken care of. And seamless integration between modes. And with bike share. When I was putting in bike share in DC, there were businesses, big businesses, that said, please don't put that ugly kiosk in front of my store. A year later, they were saying, can I pay you $56,000 to put one of those in front of my store? Because we saw an 18% increase in retail next to a bike share station. Real quick, can I talk about autonomous cars real quick? Okay. So this is why you don't need to build more parking, more dedicated parking garages. If you want to have a shared facility between buildings that can be converted later to housing or something else, and you can do that, that makes some sense. In 2017, Tesla says they'll have an autonomous car that you can switch on and off. We're looking at this basically changing the vehicle industry, and by the way, dramatically downsizing the number of cars we sell, which is why Daimler has 18 different mobility businesses. They're not going to be in the car business in 50 years. Now, some people think it's a bad idea. But you know what? We lost 1.24 million people on the world's roads last year, 32,000 in the US. It's an epidemic. The leading killer of people 10 to 19 is cars. And more parents trust their kids to ride in a driverless car than with them. So the public's way ahead of the government on this. But the government's getting on board, and they're realizing that the way vehicles work together and talk to each other will change. And in the UK, they're actually, the beginning of next year, autonomous cars will be fully legal. They're putting 5G networks everywhere so you can have vehicle-to-vehicle talking. And they're even building a spaceport. And what happens is if you need 50% fewer cars, and most of the cars are ride-sharing vehicles and taxis picking you up and dropping you off, you don't need all that curbside parking. That means you can rededicate that space to the AMP or to bike lanes, wider sidewalks. And we're not talking about 2050, we're talking about 2025. So if you're building a project now, you don't need to build these giant parking garages. You're just not going to need it. And that means that we probably need parking maximums in most cities instead of parking minimums. So basically, our cities will be completely reshaped. And all of these arguments we have about the bus and the bike lane, that's going to go away. So that's the good news. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know how fast this is coming. But if you spend time in Silicon Valley like I do, and you actually use these vehicles, there's an example of what a ride-sharing vehicle might look like that I'm actually helping to design that vehicle. It's a bike and a car all in one. It's going to happen faster than you can imagine. In fact, it's happening now. So again, I showed the New York example of the modular housing. They're already taking garages, which is like the lowest possible use for this real estate. It's just way too valuable. And they're making condos. And here's an example. There's actually a company working on, well, what if we take the place where the car is during the day and make it a sleeping spot at night? I know it sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, right? But the fact that Uber has the valuation of most of the rental car companies combined tells you that maybe it's not so crazy. Or Airbnb is worth, what, $6 billion? Something like that. And all they are is a marketplace. So things are changing. And unfortunately, that means that poverty is moving out to the suburbs where people don't want to live anymore in a lot of places. Not everywhere, but in a lot of places. I encourage everybody to read this article about Arlington, Virginia. It's in salon.com. I don't have time to go into it, but it's a great article about how a suburb became a really busy, viable city with 40 million square feet of office space, more than Denver or Dallas. And in closing, the younger people coming up, they want to live in walkable spaces. DC was just named most walkable over New York. They're pissed about it, but it's true. And in DC, we've had an 83% decline in traffic fatalities over 10 years, of all types, ped, bike. And it's not just, I mean, it's enforcement, it's everything. It's redesigning our streets, but you can do it here as well. So anyway, thanks very much for having me. Keep in touch.
We're not going yet. We're going to do the Q&A. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, real quick, we got about 25 minutes to go. Chris Bowles with Bradley Avant, one of our platinum sponsors, and he's got a bio about 12 pages long, but we don't have time to read it. And but he's going to lead us in the Q&A. So ask the questions, and Gabe will give us some good answers. You never answered my question. Tell us something about yourself that nobody knows.
Oh, well, I grew up in a commune for a while. Oh, that explains a lot, doesn't it?
All right, so we got a few minutes here, so why don't I just open it up? I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. Dave.
In the two cities where you worked, what was the scope of what you were responsible for? My background here in Nashville, it used to be water, roads, brush, garbage. Oh yeah, transportation. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious how it worked in those two cities, if it was that broad of a responsibility.
And that's been a pendulum that's swung in a lot of places. And there's a move towards creating dedicated transportation departments, because it's such a huge issue. When you look at what makes a city hum, what makes it successful, I would argue it's great public spaces, great public transportation, public safety, and public schools. The transportation department hits 3 of 4. It's not just about filling potholes, and a lot of mayors used to view it that way, like, hey, it's frontline services, it's just filling potholes and making sure the signals are timed. It's much more than that, and mayors are realizing that. And in 2000 in DC, they broke off the transportation department from Public Works, which was a super agency, but it wasn't getting a lot done. It was sort of mired in bureaucracy. By breaking it off, it's much more fast moving. Then what we did over time is really focus more on vision and planning instead of just letting the engineers sort of run the show. And no diss to engineers, but you got to have some left brain, right brain, mix. And I'll say when I went to Chicago, the thing they did the best there, and they did it before I got there, the traffic engineers reported to the planning department. Dramatically changed the balance of power in the department. Well, it was a much healthier place. And the thing is, if you don't do something like that, the engineers and the planners just fight all the time, and a lot of stuff doesn't happen. If you change the balance of power so that the planning department really takes the project to 30% and the engineers do what they do best, which is double check everything and build it. And some people would argue with me, and I'm not an engineer, I'm a business person, but you get a lot more done. And the project comes out like the public wants it. But in terms of the actual makeup, in Chicago, I actually had responsibility for the waterways. I was the harbor master as well, and they even gave me a funny hat and a bugle. And in DC, we were a vertically integrated government, so we had no state or county, so there's a big span of control there, get a lot done. We dealt directly with the feds on funding, which was a big thing as well. But in both, basically all the public space, all the operations of the transportation system, but also the planning, design, engineering, construction of all the infrastructure. So pretty much all of it, except for maintenance. The public works folks were much better at that.
Ed.
Gabe, can you talk a little bit more about value capture, the development explosion, as you described it, that occurs around transit-oriented development, requires some form of capturing that value to plow back into the initial investment. Can you talk about some successes and thoughts about that?
I mean, there are a lot of successes around the country. I think we should be doing a lot more of it. But basically, there's been this realization by government that they're leading the investment. They're making this big investment. And I would argue, actually, that, government should almost be a partner in these projects, almost like a real partner, taking an equity stake. But in some ways, they can, through value capture. So you can basically freeze the value of the land around it and then take the increment above that and either pay back the project cost or plug it back into the transportation system. And somebody like Bruce Katz can speak much more intelligently than I can about this. But I can tell you that developers are very open to this. They want to see this. You can also incentivize people, for instance, to build less parking. There's lots of ways to do that as well, which I think all cities should look at. But in terms of value capture, I mean, you can certainly look at the Portland examples. They've had great examples in Canada. There's a number of projects in the US that are sort of getting underway, streetcar projects in particular. In fact, if you look at the Detroit project, the M1 line, they've gone a step further, and the private sector is actually funding the whole thing. Well, the majority of it, outside of like $35 million, because they realize they're going to get so much out of it. So they've gone a step beyond. And basically the private sector is going to build it themselves. So, but I mean, the concept is pretty simple. You just take the increment off the increase in the tax base created by the project, and you figure out how you want to spend it. And it can easily be spent to pay back the project. If you have people arguing against spending $150 million on a BRT line or a streetcar, you say, well, look, it's going to generate this much money in tax base, so we'll just plug it right back in. Or you can use it for the future extensions. Because like the AMP line that you guys are working on, it's great, but it's just one line. You're going to want to do more. That wasn't a great answer, but yeah.
Hey, talk about tax increase. Our local government has funded all the property taxes, so that makes a lot of sense. In our particular project, there's a lot of interest in the project at state level, which doesn't get any funding return on a project like the AMP from local property taxes. I would assume a more successful local economy yields more sales tax, for example. Can you give us any information on how local and state might both benefit from this kind of investment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know all the intricacies of the government system. I know that you guys made a change 50 years ago to merge with the county, which seems really smart to me. I do know that, you know, when there's success, you know, all boats rise. And basically, the key to making our cities and therefore our states successful is you want more tax base. Now, you're going to have people that fight density. They like things the way they are. They don't want change. They like their one-story, you know, ranch house, and they like the car parking out front. And I'm not trying to be critical. That's fine. But if you want better schools, and most cities are really focused on better schools, if you want better infrastructure, you want to draw more jobs here, you've got to have more tax base. So the more you invest, the more tax base you have, which means less pressure on the state to maybe provide funding, or the feds even. You can pay for a lot of things yourself. You can fix your schools yourself. And I think that, for instance, when you're trying to lure companies here, and this has happened in South Carolina and Chicago and other places, when you show, hey, we're going to undertake a big project like the AMP, like we actually care about our infrastructure, they're much more likely to make the move. And it's not just because they value infrastructure, because they do, but it's also what their employees want. The younger employees don't want to be stuck in their cars all day. So it's sort of like you create this catalytic energy by making the investments, and everybody benefits. And I'm sure there's a much better technical answer based on the sort of Tennessee structure, which I'm just not as familiar with as you guys are. But I can tell you that sometimes taking federal money and even state money comes with too many strings. And if it's going to take you 2 to 3 times as long to build a project by getting the state and federal money, look at the opportunity cost on that money. You may be better off just funding it yourself and looking at, you know, TIF or value capture, or even involving the private sector in the project. You can do a design, build, operate, finance, maintain, where the private sector will actually come in, help you design, build it, and finance the project, and then take an availability payment over 30 years. So instead of coming up with $1 billion, you might make a, you know, $50 million payment for 30 years. And the present value of that future money is higher. Like on the Riverwalk project that we're doing in Chicago, in that case, we got a TIFIA loan for $99 million. But we got it at the overnight treasury rate, like 3% for 35 years, 2 years, where we didn't have to pay it back during construction. So, I mean, the benefits of that project so far outweigh the cost financially. By the time we're in the 35th year, it'll be like buying a Coke with our, you know, our payment to the feds.
Have you heard of crowdfunding for municipality infrastructure projects?
There is well, I've heard of crowdfunding for real estate redevelopment projects. There's a company called Fundrise. Some of you might know, is it Herb Smith in DC? Anyway, his sons, he's a developer. His sons are developers also, and they started a company called Fundrise. And there's some SEC rules they've had to get changed so that people can basically, you can get 1,000 people to invest in a corner building on 8th Street by the streetcar. In terms of funding improvements, we talked about that in Chicago, like, you know, what if we got crowdfunding for more bike share stations? We just never did it. I think it's a great idea, particularly for things like bike share, which people get really passionate about having a station near their house. Yeah, you should totally try that. That's a great pilot, where you call it a pilot, you try it, if it fails, you know.
Hi, since you kind of had to skim over the part about suburbanization of poverty a little bit, I was wondering if you could speak a little more, particularly as regards finding ways to provide better mobility in those areas, especially when those are probably areas where people are not as willing to invest.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that most cities have a successful suburb nearby. You know, in DC, it started out as Arlington, and the rest of the suburbs were not doing much with transportation, infrastructure, walkability, TDM, all this stuff. So somebody's got to set the example. Like, usually starts in the core of the city, and there's a lot of non-believers, and then once they see all the economic success and people want to live there, then it spreads, right? It spreads to a suburb. Then the other suburbs in DC saw it. So Montgomery County saw it, and Gaithersburg, and Bethesda, and Chevy Chase, and then Alexandria in Virginia, and it just sort of spreads like a good virus. And so I'm sure there's a good suburb here. In fact, I heard somebody name one yesterday that's sort of, it's almost like a new urbanist place. Might have started.
Lennox Village?
Sorry?
Lennox Village?
That might be it. And again, I don't know these things. But there's sort of a trend, right? And the trend is that the city's becoming the place where everybody wants to live. So people can get out of their car and actually have like good quality life. You know, people used to want a big house in the suburbs to spend an hour and a half commuting each way, and they're willing to suffer through it because of safety and the niceness of living in the cul-de-sac in the suburbs. But now it's changing. As the schools are getting better, public safety is better, people want to live in the city. And so you have poor people moving to the suburbs, selling their houses or just being pushed out. And then suburbs are gentrifying, and then people are being pushed out of the suburbs. So there's not a great answer, because what happens is as you make it better, it becomes a richer place. It always does. And people will always get pushed out. And it's a real concern, it's a real issue. I don't have the answer, but I do know, like in DC, we have a 1/3 set aside for affordable housing in the city. And what's been nice about that is that, you know, you'll have this ritzy condo building, and if the developer wants the tax breaks and all the things that they're going to get by working with the city, and they cannot take it, but if they want all that, they got to set aside 1/3 for low-income people. And when you do that, what you end up with is the millionaire in the penthouse, and then you have somebody making like 30, 40 grand living on the first floor or the basement level. But versus low-income housing that we used to do, like Cabrini Green and, you know, all this stuff that we've gotten rid of, this really provides an environment where people can get to know each other and get a leg up. And I think that DC is a very mixed place racially. You know, there are issues with people being pushed out, but income-wise, it's very mixed. And I think it's important because that's how people go from making 30 grand. And I have a number of friends who came here like from other countries who were living in closets and now make $300,000, $400,000 a year because they got to live in the city around these people. And a lot of them bought low-income housing units. So I think having that set aside has been crucial in terms of integrating people and making sure. But then you end up with another problem. So now my friend is part of the 1%. Right, so it's sort of never ending. Like as there's more success, there's always somebody left behind. We try to minimize it as much as possible. But the biggest segregator of people is, I think, if you have to spend over 50% of your income on your transportation, which we see that like in Southeast DC, up to 53%. I mean, that's just not fair. And if the bus is not reliable, for instance, and that's how a lot of people get to work, and you're working an hourly job, and if you're late 3 times, you get fired, then you got to provide better bus service. So there's all kinds of equity issues. It's like a whole session, right? But unfortunately, there aren't easy answers.
We have time for about one more question.
What are the dedicated funding sources of transit in DC and Chicago?
So there are various. I didn't run the transit agency per se. I ran the DOT. We partnered with the transit agency. I believe in Chicago there's a dedicated sales tax. I think it's a ½ cent dedicated sales tax that goes to the CTA. Then, of course, you have fare box recovery, which runs anywhere between 30 and 80%, depending if it's bus or rail. Then there's often bailouts from the city and state for big infrastructure projects, and then federal money that comes in on a one-off basis. Like there's a $5 billion need for the Red Line. In DC, the Metro is a regional system, so the city just writes a check every year out of the general fund for the most part, and so does Virginia and Maryland. I mean, they may have different ways that they dedicate money for it. We pay for every bus route that we run. So we're actually going to switch all the bus routes over to our local bus service for local bus, because we can operate it much more cheaply. But basically, it's a constant struggle in DC. It's a constant struggle to get more funding, particularly because you have 3 jurisdictions. In Virginia, and I think this is more for roads and bridges, a Republican governor, McDonnell, actually went to a sales tax for transportation, one of the first in the country, dedicated sales tax for transportation. It was controversial, but I think a great thing that they did, not just for transit, but for everything.
Anybody else? Or we got a couple minutes. There's one question I have is,
Yes.
It strikes me that with parking, there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem in that you want to create these complete streets, you want to reduce reliance on the automobile, and you want to start taking away some of the parking spaces, but to have the economic vitality in that transition period, it seems like you still need to be able to provide for people to get to those centers. So I'm curious what your experiences are.
That is true. And one of the things you'll see in this report, and when you talk to people, you'll hear is we need to manage our assets better, right? So it's not that we don't have enough parking, but if you make it free and you let people park there all day, you're not going to have turnover. So you can have 2 people occupy a space during the course of 8 hours. You can have 12 people. It depends on how you price it, right? We're undervaluing parking dramatically. So there's a series of carrots and sticks that you can use instead of building a lot of new parking. And for instance, in DC, we overhauled the entire parking system. It was so bad. Nobody could understand what the rules were. We had too many signs. And we had these little meters that took quarters that were always jammed with paper clips and stuff. So we overhauled the entire system. We put in solar-powered networked meters that talked to each other, let us know when they were broken, took credit cards. We layered in a pay-by-phone system on top of it. And now almost 60% of people pay by phone in the city. Our revenue went up 60%. We use that money to pay for things like bike share and all kinds of other innovative projects. But turnover went up, so retail goes up, right? But it's controversial. It's like, you're going to raise my parking from $1 to $2, or in Chicago it's now $6. That sounds crazy. But if you don't do that and it's free, people don't value it, right? So, that's my argument. But I think if you're building new parking garages, just realize that in 10 years you're going to be converting them. And at $65,000 a parking space, particularly when you go underground, developers would much rather build condos or apartments. And if you do that, it changes the economics of the whole building. And then you can have affordable housing. If you got rid of a lot of the parking, you could have affordable housing and the developers wouldn't mind. So, yeah, parking is a huge thing that's going to change. And you can sort of be on the front end of it and make better decisions economically, or be on the back end of it. And I would advise you, at least if you can design the parking garages so they can be easily converted to housing or offices.
One more.
I just want to expand on that a little bit. Describe how DC does their parking garages with their metro system. I'm a little bit familiar with that, but I think that would be good.
Yeah.
Because I like the Star Rail system here, but we only have one left, and that's the problem.
Right.
And so I think that parking garage aspect would help bring a lot of these outside communities into the city and solve a lot of the problems you're talking about.
So what is typically done, whether it's in Chicago or DC, where there's like a subway stop, you basically waive the parking, and you let the developer decide how little parking they want. And in some cases, cities are moving, and DC I think is close to this, moving to parking maximums instead of minimums. So instead of saying, if you're gonna have 2 bedrooms, you need 2 parking spaces, we're saying, for every 2 apartments, you can have 1 parking space. And that's really important, because if we're letting you build next to transit, we're giving you incentives. If you're putting in a bunch of parking spaces, you're gonna congest the whole neighborhood and defeat the purpose of having the transit. And the developers, they wanna do this stuff. The problem is if the government doesn't lead, then the developers feel like they're competing against each other. And if this guy's got 2 parking spaces for 2 bedrooms, I have to, or I can't be competitive. But that's even changing because the people moving into the cities don't want the parking anyway. So they're saying, okay, so the condo is $350, and with the parking it's gonna be $435. I don't want the parking. Then they're stuck with these parking spaces. And so often the developers are ahead of the cities, particularly secondary, tertiary cities. But around transit, what a lot of cities are doing is saying you don't have to build any parking or very little parking. And you sell it separately from the housing. And then micro units is a whole new thing where a lot of these micro unit buildings just don't have any parking. Because if you're willing to live in 250 square feet, you probably don't need a 400 square foot parking space or whatever it is. Right. And just one more thing about that, because people living in the city, like my sister lives in New York and Brooklyn, she doesn't spend any time in her place. She goes there to sleep. You go to bars and restaurants there, parks, they're all packed. Because everybody's space is so small, nobody has gatherings in their place. So that's where we're heading to, and that's why around your developments you want to have park space and cafes and restaurants and bike share stations, because that's where the people are going to be, not in their apartments.
All right, great, thanks, Chris. All right, thank you. September 18th is our next program. Remember to take Steve Kalinsky and Laura Reinbold's call. We need sponsorships. We need to grow our membership. And thank you very much for coming.